Hey everyone, welcome back. Just before we start, it's a fun idea if you type in where you're listening from. Thanks, like and subscribe, and let's get this started. I woke up the next morning in a fog, replaying the events of the night before in my head. My wife had already left for work, her routine uninterrupted, while my world had completely shattered. It felt like my brain was buzzing, trying to make sense of everything, but one thing was clear. I couldn't confront her. Not yet. The videos, the lies, the way she dragged our son into it, it was all too calculated. She'd played me, played us both, and I wasn't going to react like some fool who just found out his wife was cheating. No, I had to stay in control. I couldn't lose my temper and give her the satisfaction of watching me unravel. I needed answers, but more importantly, I needed a plan. The first thing I did was go through her phone. It wasn't hard. She never expected me to check. She probably thought I trusted her too much to even care. My hands shook a little as I opened her messages. Nothing. Just the usual texts with her friends and colleagues. But I wasn't stupid. There had to be another way they were communicating. Something hidden deeper. That's when I found the encrypted app. I stared at the icon for a moment, my chest tight. It was one of those private messaging apps, the kind people use when they don't want their conversations tracked. I opened it. And there it was, a long history of messages between her and the man I'd seen in the videos. My stomach twisted with each line I read. They'd been together for months, sneaking around behind my back. She'd been making excuses, meeting him during work trips, and setting up their next encounters right under my nose. But it wasn't just the affair. It was worse than that. They were talking about our son, how the guy was so good with him, how second dad was going to be a more stable presence in his life than I ever could. The rage hit me hard. This wasn't just about cheating. She was planning a future with him, integrating him into our son's life as if I was already out of the picture. I slammed the phone down and took a deep breath, trying to keep control. The pain was overwhelming, but I couldn't let it paralyze me. I needed to be smarter than her, stay 2 steps ahead. She thought she had everything worked out, but she didn't know who she was dealing with. I was going to make her pay for every single lie. That night, I acted like nothing had changed. She came home, kissed me on the cheek, asked how my day was. I smiled and told her work had been stressful. She seemed relieved, probably thinking her secret was still safe. We ate dinner together, our son chattering away about school, oblivious to the storm brewing right in front of him. I played the part of the loving husband, nodding, laughing at her jokes, pretending nothing was wrong. But inside, my mind was racing, calculating every possible move. Later, when she went to bed, I stayed up. I couldn't sleep. The weight of what I had to do kept me awake, my thoughts spinning. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about taking back control of my life, of my son's life. She had turned our marriage into a lie, and I wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed. I wanted to destroy everything she had built with that man. Piece by piece, I started documenting everything. Every message, every call, every trip she'd taken. I backed up the videos, the texts, even her calendar events. I was building my case step by step, laying out all the evidence that would rip her world apart. She had no idea, and that gave me the upper hand. Days passed, and I kept up the charade. She acted like everything was fine, probably thinking she'd gotten away with it. But I was watching her every move, waiting for the right moment to strike. I needed time and patience. She'd made a fool out of me, but that wouldn't last. And then, just as I was finalizing my plans, the phone call came. It was early morning, just after she had left for work. I didn't recognize the number, but something told me to pick up. "Hello," I answered, my voice still groggy from sleep. "Is this her husband?" a male voice asked. Cold, detached, my stomach dropped. I knew who it was before he even said his name. "I think you should come by my place," the man on the other end continued. "Her things are here, and there's something else you'll want to see. Your son's DNA test results are with me. This wasn't part of our deal." I felt a chill run through me, my breath catching in my throat. A deal? What deal? What the hell was he talking about? My pulse raced as I tried to process what he was saying. The line went dead before I could respond, leaving me with a million questions and no answers. For a moment, I just stood there staring at the phone in disbelief. What did he mean about DNA results? Was he implying my son wasn't mine? Was that the reason he was so close to my wife? My mind swirled with possibilities, each one darker than the last. The game had just changed, and I wasn't prepared for it. I rushed to the door and flung it open, half expecting to find my wife's things and the so-called DNA results right there on the porch. But there was nothing. No package, no test kit. I was left standing in the doorway, staring out into the empty street. It felt like the ground was shifting beneath me, everything I thought I knew crumbling. I knew one thing, though. This wasn't just about her cheating anymore. There was something bigger at play, something she had been hiding from me for even longer than I realized. And now her lover had thrown down a new gauntlet. He was daring me to act, to confront this head on. I wasn't going to back down, not now. If he thought threatening me with some half-baked lie about a DNA test would scare me, he was dead wrong. I was going to push forward, get to the bottom of whatever twisted game they were playing, and make sure they both paid for it. But I had to be careful. The stakes were higher now. This wasn't just about my marriage anymore. My son was involved. If this man thought he could manipulate me into acting impulsively, he didn't know who he was dealing with. I wasn't the type to fly off the handle. I needed to gather more information, stay calm, and figure out my next move. I couldn't let her know I was on to her, not yet. If she sensed anything, she might pull the rug out from under me before I was ready. No, I had to play this right. I had to stay patient, methodical. My wife had spent months, maybe even years, building this web of lies. And now I was going to untangle it, thread by thread, until I exposed everything. She thought she could walk away from this, that she could rewrite our family's future without me. But she had no idea what I was capable of. I wasn't going to lose. The game had changed, but I was still in control. I had to be. I sat in the darkened living room, the only light coming from the faint glow of the phone in my hand. It was late, too late to think clearly, but my mind wasn't giving me a break. I was piecing everything together, her lies, her betrayal, the videos, the calls. It was like solving a puzzle, but every time I thought I had the picture complete, another piece fell into my lap. I couldn't stop thinking about that phone call, the chilling way her lover talked about my son like he was a bargaining chip. This wasn't just some sleazy affair. There was more at stake here, and I needed to find out exactly what that was before I made my move. I knew confronting her now would be a mistake. I wasn't ready, and the last thing I needed was for her to get defensive or start twisting the situation to her advantage. No, I had to be careful. I had to make sure everything was lined up perfectly before I struck. That's when I started planning, mapping out every detail like I was preparing for war. The first thing I did was reach out to a lawyer, not just any lawyer, a shark. I needed someone who would rip her apart in court if it came to that. Custody, finances, reputation. I wanted it all on the table, but I couldn't tip my hand too early. I didn't want her catching wind of this before I was ready to burn it all down. My lawyer, Daniel, sat across from me in his office, the kind of guy who radiated cold efficiency. He listened, nodding occasionally as I laid out the situation. No judgment, no questions, just listening. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping lightly on the desk. "Do you have evidence?" he asked, his voice calm. I pulled out my phone, showing him the messages, the videos, the call logs. I had everything backed up, meticulously organized. Daniels nodded approvingly. "This is good," he said, "but we need more. If we're going to hit her hard, we need to make sure there's no wiggle room. We need witnesses, financial records, anything that paints her as unstable, and we need to move fast." I knew he was right. I wasn't just playing defense here. I needed to go on the offensive, make sure when the hammer came down, it shattered her world. I wanted to control the narrative, make sure I came out of this looking like the victim, the devoted husband who was wronged, the father who just wanted to protect his son. After the meeting with Daniels, I started planting seeds. Subtle at first, casual conversations with friends, dropping hints about how distant she'd been, how she'd been taking more trips for work, how something felt off. People started noticing. I made sure of it. I wanted them talking, questioning her integrity, her loyalty. By the time this all blew up, the groundwork would already be laid. She'd be the one on the defensive, scrambling to explain herself. At home, I played the part of the loving husband, all the while watching her every move. I started testing her, asking questions that seemed innocent but were laced with traps. Where she'd been, who she'd seen. Each time her answers were smooth, rehearsed even. But I knew better now. I could hear the lies in her voice, see the guilt in her eyes. She had no idea I was circling her, waiting for the right moment to pounce. One night after our son had gone to bed, she slid into bed next to me, her body brushing against mine in a way that used to set my blood on fire. But now all I felt was disgust. I kept my voice steady, my hands gentle, as I ran my fingers down her back. She responded, her breath catching, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. The intimacy we once shared had been tainted, twisted by her betrayal. She kissed me, her lips soft against mine, but it was mechanical, a performance. I played along, pretending I didn't know what she'd done. When it was over, she curled into me, whispering how much she loved me. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing, trying to reconcile the woman beside me with the one I saw in those videos. The one laughing with another man, calling him second dad. The next day I started digging deeper. I needed to know everything about this man she was involved with. It didn't take long to find out more than I bargained for. He wasn't just some random guy. He had connections, money, power. The kind of man who didn't just walk away quietly when things went south. I couldn't help but wonder how far this thing went. Was she planning to leave me for him? Were they plotting something together? The more I uncovered, the more dangerous the situation felt. This wasn't just a typical affair. This was something else. I called Daniels immediately, filling him in on the new details. He didn't sound surprised. "You need to be careful," he warned. "Men like that don't play by the rules. If he feels cornered, he'll strike back, and he won't care who gets hurt in the process." I knew he was right. This guy wasn't going to just let me take her down without a fight. And if he'd already brought my son into this, there was no telling how far he'd go. But I couldn't back down. If anything, this only fueled my determination. I wasn't going to let this man or her destroy everything I'd built. I had to be smarter, more ruthless. I spent the next few weeks building my case, gathering every piece of evidence I could find, pulling in favors from old contacts who could help me dig deeper. Financial records, hidden accounts, travel documents, everything pointed to the fact that she'd been preparing for this for a long time. She'd been siphoning money from our joint accounts, setting up a separate life behind my back. And the worst part? She'd involved our son in all of it, bringing him into the sick fantasy of a new family with her lover. I couldn't let this stand, not just for me, but for my son. He deserved better than to be part of her twisted game. But I had to be careful. I couldn't let her know what I knew. Not yet. One evening after putting our son to bed, she sat down next to me on the couch, a glass of wine in her hand. She looked tired, but there was a calmness about her that made me uneasy, like she was at peace with whatever she was hiding. "I've been thinking," she said softly, taking a sip, "maybe we should take a trip, just the two of us, reconnect." I smiled, keeping my voice light. "That sounds nice. Where do you want to go?" She shrugged, leaning into me. "Anywhere. I just think we need some time away. You know, things have been hard lately." Hard, that was an understatement. But I wasn't about to show my hand, not yet. I wrapped my arm around her, pulling her close, playing the role of the loving husband. If she wanted to believe I was still blind to her betrayal, I'd let her. For now. "Let's plan something," I said, kissing her forehead. "We could use a break." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She was lying to me again. I could feel it. Later that night, after she'd fallen asleep, I went back to my office, pulling out the documents I'd hidden away. I had everything I needed to destroy her: divorce papers, custody filings, the evidence of her affair, the financial records showing how she'd been stealing from me, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. I needed to hit her harder, make sure when this all came crashing down, there was nothing left for her to salvage. That's when I started leaking the information. Just small things at first. A conversation here, a rumor there. People started asking questions, wondering what was going on with us. I played my part perfectly, concerned but oblivious. Let her be the one who looked guilty. Let her feel the walls closing in. And then, just as I was ready to pull the trigger, I uncovered something else. Her lover wasn't just a fling. He had connections to people who could make things very difficult for me. Powerful people, dangerous people. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about him, too. If I wasn't careful, this could spiral out of control. I sat back in my chair, staring at the documents in front of me. I had her in the palm of my hand, but now there was a new layer of risk. One wrong move, and this could turn into something much bigger than I'd planned. But I wasn't going to stop. I couldn't. She'd betrayed me in the worst possible way, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I just have to be smarter, more cautious. I needed to find a way to neutralize him before I made my final move. As I closed the folder and locked it away, I felt the tension in my chest tighten. The stakes had just been raised, but that only made me more determined. She thought she could ruin me, destroy our family, but she had no idea what was coming. I'd make sure of that. I sat across from her at the kitchen table. The air between us felt thick, suffocating. She was reading something on her phone, oblivious to the bomb I was about to drop. My hand rested on a folder beside me. Inside were months of messages, bank statements, travel receipts, everything I needed to bury her. My heart pounded, but my face stayed calm. I had rehearsed this moment in my head so many times, and now it was time to execute. "Put the phone down," I said, my voice steady. She looked up, her eyes narrowing in confusion. I rarely use that tone. I slid the folder across the table. "You need to see this." Her fingers hesitated before picking it up. I watched as she flipped through the documents, her face slowly draining of color. She set the papers down, her mouth opening and closing, trying to find the words. "What the hell is this?" she asked, but I could hear the tremor in her voice. "It's everything. Everything you've been hiding." My words were sharp, controlled. I leaned forward. "The affair, the lies, the money you've been siphoning. It's all here." Her face hardened. "You've been spying on me?" I laughed, the sound bitter. "Spying? No, I've been collecting evidence. Evidence that'll destroy you if you don't agree to my terms." She blinked, caught off guard. "Your terms?" "Yes." I straightened in my chair, every part of me now cold, methodical. "You're going to give me full custody of our son. You're going to sign over the house. And you're going to walk away from everything quietly. Or I will release this to the courts, to your friends, your family. Everyone will know who you really are." Her hands trembled. She knew I wasn't bluffing. She knew what I was capable of. You can't do this." "I can," I said, my voice lowering, "and I will." She started to crumble then, her defenses cracking as panic flickered in her eyes. "But he's my son too. You can't take him from me." I felt a surge of satisfaction. This was it, the moment she realized she had lost. "You brought him into this. You're the one who's been making him call that man second dad. You made this bed. Now lie in it." Her eyes widened in shock. I cut her off. "I know everything, every little detail." I leaned closer, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "And if you even think of fighting me on this, I'll make sure you lose him. Forever." She was breaking, I could see it. Her breathing was shallow, her face pale. "Please don't do this," she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. I stayed silent, letting her words hang in the air. I wasn't here to comfort her. I was here to crush her. The silence stretched on until finally she spoke again, her voice hoarse. "What do you want?" "Everything," I said. "I want everything." The doorbell rang, slicing through the tension like a blade. I glanced toward the front door, frowning. She didn't move. Her eyes were wide, terror creeping across her face. "I'll get it," I muttered, rising from the table. I walked to the door, opened it, and froze. There was a package on the doorstep, a small box wrapped tightly in brown paper. My stomach twisted. Something about it felt wrong. I bent down, picked it up, and brought it inside. "What is it?" she asked, her voice shaky. "I don't know." I set the box down on the table, my fingers clenching around the edge. I reached for a knife, slicing through the wrapping. Inside was a black USB drive resting on a folded piece of paper. I pulled the paper out first. It was a note, written in neat, tight handwriting. "Play it." That's all it said. I exchanged a glance with her. She was trembling now, her face pale as a ghost. "Who sent this?" she whispered. "I don't know," I said again, but something in my gut told me I was about to find out. I walked over to my laptop, plugged the USB drive in, and opened the file. A video started playing. It was grainy at first, but I recognized the room immediately. It was our son's room. My heart stopped. The camera panned across the room until it landed on my son, sitting on his bed. And there, next to him, was the man from the videos, the one my wife had been calling second dad. My blood turned to ice. The man smiled into the camera, his hand resting on my son's shoulder. "I warned you," he said, his voice low and menacing. "I told you this wasn't part of the deal." I stared at the screen, barely breathing. The man leaned in closer to my son, his eyes never leaving the camera. "You took something from me. Now I'm taking something from you." The video cut off. I couldn't move. My heart pounded in my ears. The room seemed to tilt, the walls closing in on me. My wife was saying something, her voice frantic, but I couldn't hear her. My mind was stuck on that last image, my son, sitting there with that man, completely unaware of the danger he was in. I turned to her, my voice raw with fury. "What the hell is this?" "I don't know," she cried, tears streaming down her face. He said he wouldn't." "Wouldn't what?" I roared, grabbing her by the arm. "What deal did you make with him?" She was sobbing now, her words a garbled mess. I thought he just wanted to be with me. He said he wouldn't hurt him. He promised." I let go of her, disgust rolling through me. She had no idea what she had done, no idea who she had let into our lives. My mind raced, trying to figure out my next move. I couldn't go to the police. This man was powerful, well-connected. If I involved the authorities, it could backfire. I had to handle this on my own. I stormed out of the room, my mind spinning. I needed to act fast, but I couldn't think straight. My son was in danger, and this man, this monster, was playing a game I wasn't prepared for. I picked up my phone, dialing Daniel's. When he answered, I didn't waste time. "It's worse than we thought," I said, my voice tight with barely contained panic. "He's got my son." Daniels was silent for a moment, then his voice came through, calm and steady. "All right, listen to me. Don't do anything rash. We need to think this through." "I don't have time to think," I snapped. "He's threatening my son." "I understand that," Daniel said. "But if you rush in without a plan, you'll make things worse. Trust me, we need to play this smart." I clenched my jaw, my body shaking with adrenaline. He was right. I couldn't afford to lose control now. Not when the stakes were this high. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice low. "First, we need to figure out where he is," Daniel said. "Do you have any idea where he might be holding your son?" I thought back to the video, trying to recall any details. There was nothing, no clear signs of location, no background noise. Just my son, sitting on that bed, oblivious to the threat. "No," I said, "but I'll find him." Daniels paused. "We'll get him back, but you need to be patient. If you go charging in, you'll only put your son at more risk. Let me make some calls. We'll track this guy down." I hung up, my hands trembling. Patience. That's what he said. But how could I be patient when my son's life was on the line? I paced the room, trying to think of my next move. I couldn't just sit here, waiting for Daniels to work his magic. I had to do something. I looked at the clock. It was past midnight. I knew where my wife's lover worked. I knew his routine. If anyone could tell me where he was hiding, it was him. And I wasn't going to wait for the lawyers or the police. I stormed back into the kitchen. My wife was still sitting there, staring at the table, her face streaked with tears. "I'm going to find him," I said, grabbing my keys. "You stay here. Don't leave the house. And if you hear from him, you call me immediately." She didn't respond, just nodded, her body shaking. I left the house, the cold night air hitting me like a slap. My mind was racing, my pulse hammering in my ears. I couldn't afford to fail. Not now. Not with my son's life hanging in the balance. I drove to the man's office, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. I knew he worked late sometimes, and tonight I was counting on it. When I arrived, the building was dark, but I could see a light on in one of the upper floors. I parked the car, my heart pounding in my chest, and headed for the entrance. This was it, the final move, and I wasn't leaving without answers. The moment I stepped out of the car and into the cold night air, I felt it, the weight of what was coming. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about saving my son. The stakes had shifted, and I was caught in a game I didn't fully understand. But I didn't have the luxury of hesitation. Not now. The office building loomed in front of me, a single light on in the upper corner. I knew he was there. I knew this was the only chance I had to confront him and end this before things spiraled further out of control. My heart pounded in my chest as I made my way inside, my mind racing through every possible scenario. I couldn't lose control. Not now. The lobby was dark, empty. My footsteps echoed against the marble floors as I made my way to the elevator, my body tense, every nerve on edge. The doors slid open with a soft chime, and I stepped inside, pressing the button for the top floor. As the elevator ascended, my mind drifted to my son, his face, his laughter, his innocence. He didn't deserve this. None of this. The elevator stopped, and I stepped out into a narrow hallway. At the end, a glass door was cracked open, the faint glow of a desk lamp spilling out into the hall. I approached it slowly, my footsteps quiet, my breathing steady. I couldn't afford any mistakes. Inside, he was sitting at his desk, casually leaning back in his chair, as if he had been expecting me. His smug smile made my skin crawl. "Took you long enough," he said, not bothering to stand. My jaw tightened. "Where's my son?" He gestured to the empty chair in front of him, his expression calm, almost bored. "Why don't you sit down and we'll talk about that?" I didn't move. Every muscle in my body was coiled, ready to snap. "I'm not here to talk." "Really?" His smile widened, a cruel edge to it now. "You think you're going to barge in here and play the hero? It's too late for that. You should have stayed out of this when I warned you." I took a step closer, my fists clenched. "Where is he?" He sighed, shaking his head. "You still don't get it, do you? This isn't a game you can win. You're not in control, I am." He reached into his desk drawer, pulling out a tablet. With a swipe, a video appeared on the screen. My son. He was sitting on the edge of a bed, looking around nervously. The camera was angled from the corner of the room, watching him. My blood went cold. "You took something from me," he said, his voice low, dangerous. "Now I'm taking something from you." I lunged for him, but he was faster, pulling out a small pistol from his jacket and pointing it straight at my chest. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears. "Don't be stupid," he hissed, his finger hovering over the trigger. "You think I won't pull this?" I swallowed, trying to keep my breathing steady. "Where's my son?" "He's safe for now, but that could change if you don't start cooperating." He leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine. "You thought you could just walk away from this? That you could take her and everything would be fine?" I glared at him. "I don't want her." "Liar," he sneered. "You want to ruin her, destroy everything she's built. And for what? Some twisted sense of justice? Revenge? That's not how this works." I shook my head, my voice tight. "I'm not here for her, I'm here for my son." "And you'll get him back," he said, his tone casual, as if we were discussing a business deal. "But first you're going to do something for me." I frowned, the knot in my stomach tightening. What do you want? He smiled again, leaning back in his chair, the gun still trained on me. I want you to walk away. I want you to disappear. Take the divorce, take the money, take whatever you want, but you leave her and me alone. If you try to expose us, if you even think about using that evidence you've been collecting, you'll never see your son again. My hands shook, fury boiling just beneath the surface. You expect me to trust you? No, I expect you to be smart. You have no choice. You cross me and you lose everything. He gestured to the video still playing on the tablet. And I do mean everything. The weight of his words crashed down on me, suffocating. I couldn't risk my son's life, not for revenge, not for anything. For a moment, I stood there, my mind racing, trying to calculate my next move. If I agreed to his terms, I'd be giving up everything. I'd lose the upper hand, lose the chance to destroy her, to take back control, but if I didn't, I might lose my son. My heart pounded in my chest, my mind spinning. And then, in that moment, I realized something. He thought he had won. He thought he had me backed into a corner, but he didn't know me. He didn't know what I was capable of. I wasn't going to lose. Slowly, I raised my hands, showing him I wasn't a threat. Fine, I said, my voice steady. I'll walk away, but you give me my son first. He studied me for a long moment, his eyes narrowing. How do I know you're not bluffing? You don't, I replied. But what other choice do you have? If something happens to him, there's no going back. I'll burn your life to the ground. He smirked, lowering the gun slightly. Fair point. He pressed a button on his desk, and a moment later, the door to his office opened. My son stood in the doorway, confused but unharmed. Relief washed over me, but I didn't let my guard down. Go to your dad, the man said, his voice cold. My son hesitated, glancing between us, then rushed to my side. I pulled him close, my hand resting on his head, my heart hammering in my chest. He was safe, for now. I looked back at the man, my eyes burning with hatred. This isn't over, he chuckled, leaning back in his chair. It is if you know what's good for you. Now get out. I didn't argue. I didn't want to push my luck. I turned, leading my son out of the office, my mind still spinning, trying to process everything that had just happened. I had my son back, but at what cost? I had agreed to walk away, to let him win, but something inside me told me this wasn't the end. I couldn't just let it go. As we stepped into the elevator, my son looked up at me, his eyes wide. Dad, what's going on? Who was that man? I forced a smile, trying to keep my voice calm. It's okay, buddy. Everything's going to be okay. But even as I said the words, I knew they were a lie. Nothing was okay. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. We made it back to the car, my mind racing as I buckled him in. I couldn't go home. Not yet. Not with him still out there, watching, waiting. I needed to be smart. I needed to figure out my next move. But the only thing I could think about was how close I had come to losing everything. I drove in silence, my hands gripping the wheel, my mind still spinning. I had underestimated him, underestimated the lengths he would go to, but I wouldn't make that mistake again. I would find a way to take him down, to protect my son, to end this once and for all. I pulled into a hotel parking lot, my heart still pounding in my chest. We would stay here for the night, away from the house, away from everything. I needed time to think, to plan. I needed to find a way out of this mess. My son was asleep by the time we checked in, his small body curled up on the bed, completely unaware of the danger we were in. I sat in the chair by the window, staring out into the darkness, my mind racing with possibilities. I couldn't go to the police. I couldn't trust anyone. The only person I could rely on was myself, and I had to find a way to end this, but I didn't know how. For the first time since this whole thing started, I felt the weight of it all crashing down on me. The anger, the betrayal, the fear. It was all too much, but I couldn't break. I couldn't afford to lose control. I looked over at my son, sleeping peacefully, and felt a surge of determination. I would protect him. I would end this. No matter what it took. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found the number I needed. Daniels. He answered on the second ring, his voice groggy. What's going on? It's worse than I thought, I said, my voice low. We need to talk. Daniels sighed. Meet me in the morning. No, I said, my voice firm. Now. He was quiet for a moment, then finally said, All right, where are you? I gave him the address of the hotel, my mind still spinning. I had no idea what I was going to do next, but I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I sat in the hotel room, the dim light casting shadows on the wall, my son sleeping peacefully in the bed beside me. I should have felt relief, but I didn't. My mind wouldn't stop. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that video. My son, sitting there with that man's hand on his shoulder, unaware of the danger that was so close. I had won. I had my son back, and I'd forced my wife and her lover into a corner. But the victory didn't feel like I thought it would. It felt hollow, empty. The guilt gnawed at me, deep and persistent. I had spent so long focused on revenge, on bringing her down, that I hadn't stopped to think about the cost. The things I had exposed my son to, the lengths I had gone to destroy her life, it was starting to wear on me. The anger that had fueled me for so long had turned into something darker, something that was eating away at me from the inside. I looked at my son, his chest rising and falling gently, and wondered how much damage had already been done. I had tried to protect him, but in the end, I had pulled him into a nightmare. He didn't deserve this. He deserved better. I ran a hand over my face, trying to shake off the exhaustion. There was no going back now. What was done, but the weight of it all felt unbearable. I couldn't help but question everything, every decision, every move I'd made. Had it been worth it? Had I really won? Or had I just destroyed everything in the process? Daniels had come through for me, like he always did. After that night in the office, he'd helped me put everything in place. The confrontation had gone exactly as planned. My wife had broken down, and her lover, after realizing I had the upper hand, had backed off, his threats hollow. I had outplayed them both, but the victory felt like ashes in my mouth. I got up quietly, stepping out into the hotel hallway. I needed air, needed to clear my head. The cold hit me as soon as I stepped outside, but it didn't bring the clarity I was hoping for. I felt numb. I leaned against the railing, staring out into the empty parking lot, my thoughts circling like vultures. I had set out on this path with a clear goal, to destroy her for what she'd done to me, to our family. I had wanted to make her pay, to take away everything that mattered to her, and I had succeeded. She was ruined. Our friends knew the truth, her reputation was shattered, and legally she didn't stand a chance of keeping custody. She had lost it all. But so had I. I wasn't the man I used to be. The person I had become over the last few months, the man who had meticulously plotted and executed this revenge, it scared me. I had been so focused on winning that I hadn't realized how much I had lost along the way. And now, standing here in the cold, I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to go back to who I was before. I heard a soft shuffle behind me. I turned, startled, to see my son standing in the doorway, his small figure silhouetted by the light from the hallway. Dad? His voice was sleepy, confused. I forced a smile, walking over to him. Hey, buddy. You should be in bed. He rubbed his eyes, looking up at me with that innocent expression that made my heart ache. Are we going home tomorrow? Yeah, I said, kneeling down to his level. We're going home. He hesitated, then asked, Is Mom coming with us? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I had tried to shield him from the truth, but there was no escaping it now. I had torn our family apart. I had wanted to protect him from the lies, from the betrayal, but in the end, I had only exposed him to more pain. I swallowed hard, my voice thick. No, buddy, Mom's not coming with us. His brow furrowed in confusion. Why? I struggled to find the right words, but nothing seemed good enough. Nothing could explain what I had done. Sometimes things happen between grown-ups, and it's not your fault, but your mom and I were not going to live together anymore. He looked at me, his eyes wide, trying to understand. And in that moment, I saw it. The crack, the damage, the innocence that was slipping away because of the choices I had made. I pulled him into a hug, my throat tightening. "I'm sorry, buddy. I'm so sorry." He didn't say anything, just held on to me, his small arms wrapped tightly around my neck. And in that moment, I felt the weight of everything I had done crash down on me. The revenge, the lies, the manipulation. It had all been for nothing. Because in the end, the person who was hurt the most was the one I had been trying to protect. I didn't know how long we stood there, but eventually I felt him relax in my arms, his breathing steady as he drifted back to sleep. I carried him back inside, laying him gently on the bed. As I watched him sleep, I couldn't help but wonder if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. I sat in the chair by the window, staring out into the darkness, the silence pressing down on me. The revenge had consumed me, driven me to do things I never thought I was capable of. And now, in the aftermath, I was left with nothing but guilt and regret. I thought about my wife, about how easily I had destroyed her. She had betrayed me, yes, but in my quest to make her pay, I had become someone I didn't recognize. I had lost sight of everything that had once mattered to me, and now I didn't know how to move forward. My phone buzzed on the table, pulling me out of my thoughts. I picked it up, my heart sinking as I saw the message. "You think this is over?" "It's not. You took everything from me. Now it's my turn." The message was from an unknown number, but I knew exactly who it was from: her lover. The man who had been pulling the strings from the start. The man I thought I had defeated. I stared at the message, a cold knot forming in my stomach. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. He wasn't done with me, and as much as I wanted to walk away, to leave this nightmare behind, I knew I couldn't. Not with my son's life still hanging in the balance. I stood up, my hands shaking. The guilt, the regret, it would have to wait. I couldn't afford to let it consume me. Not yet. I had to protect my son. I had to finish what I had started. I quickly packed our things, my mind racing. I needed to get out of here. Needed to figure out my next move. I couldn't stay in one place for too long, not with the threat still looming over us. I needed a plan. As I gathered our things, I glanced at my son, still sleeping peacefully. I had fought so hard to protect him, to keep him safe. But in doing so, I had dragged him into a war he never should have been a part of. The weight of it all pressed down on me as I realized that this cycle wasn't ending. I had set something in motion that couldn't be stopped. Not easily. The man who had sent that message wasn't going to back off. He wanted revenge just as much as I had, and he was willing to play dirty to get it. I looked down at my hands, the ones that had carefully crafted the plan to ruin my wife. They trembled now, the consequences of my actions finally sinking in. I had won a battle, but at what cost? My son was safe for now, but I knew that as long as this man was out there, we weren't free. We would never be free. I grabbed my phone and dialed Daniel's. He answered after a few rings, his voice tired but alert. "What's going on?" I read him the message. He was silent for a moment before he sighed. "I told you this was bigger than you thought." "What do I do now?" I asked, my voice low, desperate. Daniels hesitated. "You need to go into hiding. Lay low for a while. Don't engage with him. I'll work on getting more information, but you need to be smart." "Hiding isn't an option," I muttered, glancing at my son again. "I have to finish this." Daniel sighed again, but I could hear the resignation in his voice. "Then be careful. You're playing with fire. This man, he won't stop until he gets what he wants." "And what does he want?" I asked, my stomach sinking. "To ruin you, like you ruined him." The line went dead. I stood there in the silence, the reality of it all settling over me. This wasn't going to end. The man who had sent that message was coming for me, for everything I had left. And the worst part? I didn't know if I could stop him. I sat down in the chair again, my hands still shaking. The revenge I had so carefully plotted, the life I had so thoroughly dismantled, it was all falling apart. I had become everything I hated, and now I was paying the price. I looked out into the darkness, my mind racing, my heart heavy. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I sit alone in my living room, the house eerily quiet. The only sound is the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. My son is upstairs, finally asleep after another rough night. The weight of everything I've done presses down on me, harder than it ever has. I've won. I protected him. I destroyed her, but at what cost? I stare at the empty glass in my hand, my fingers tracing the rim. The whiskey doesn't burn anymore. I've grown used to it. I wonder how I got here, how I became this person. When did revenge become the only thing that mattered? I remember thinking that if I could just take her down, if I could just ruin her the way she ruined me, everything would fall back into place. But that was a lie. Nothing feels right. Nothing feels fixed. I close my eyes, the memories flooding back, unrelenting. The confrontation with her, the panic in her eyes as I laid everything out. She knew she couldn't fight me. She knew I had already won. I remember the moment she realized it was over. Her life, her control, her lies, everything crumbling around her. I'd expected satisfaction. Instead, all I felt was emptiness. And then there's my son. He's the only reason I don't let it all consume me. But even he's scarred. I see it in the way he looks at me, the way he asks about her in those quiet, uncertain moments. I try to shield him from the worst of it, but deep pain, I know he's already seen too much. He's too young to understand, but he knows something's wrong. He feels it, even if he can't say it. The phone buzzes on the table, pulling me out of my thoughts. Another message. I don't need to look to know who it's from. Her lover. He hasn't let up since that last encounter. I've tried to ignore the messages, tried to act like he's not there, but the truth is I can't escape it. He's out there, lurking, waiting. It's a shadow over everything, reminding me that this isn't over. I glance at the message, my heart sinking. You think this is done? You're wrong, I'm just getting started. My hand tightens around the phone. I want to scream, to throw it across the room, to break something. But I don't. I can't let him win. Not again. I've already lost too much to this. I stand up, pacing the room, my thoughts spiraling. What am I supposed to do now? I've fought so hard to protect my son, but how do I protect him from this? From a man who has nothing left to lose? A man who blames me for everything he's lost? I think back to the moment I made my decision to destroy her, to take everything from her. I told myself it was justice, that she deserved it for what she did to me, to our family. But now, standing here, I wonder if I was wrong. Maybe revenge wasn't the answer. Maybe it never was. The weight of that realization hits me like a punch to the gut. I've spent so long chasing after something that I thought would make everything right. But all it's done is tear me apart. I'm not the man I used to be. I don't know who I am anymore. I sit back down, the exhaustion washing over me. My mind is racing, but I can't focus on anything. I think about my son again, about the future I wanted for him. I wanted him to grow up in a world where things made sense, where right and wrong were clear. But I've blurred those lines so much that I don't know where they are anymore. And I've dragged him into this mess with me. I run a hand through my hair, staring out the window at the darkness. It feels like it's closing in, suffocating. I try to breathe, to calm myself, but the knot in my chest tightens. This isn't over, not by a long shot. The door creaks open and my son's small figure appears at the top of the stairs. His voice is soft, barely a whisper. Dad? I turn to him, forcing a smile. Yeah, buddy? You okay? He hesitates, rubbing his eyes. I had a bad dream. I get up, crossing the room to him. I scoop him up in my arms, feeling the weight of his little body against mine. I hold him close, his head resting on my shoulder. It's okay, I whisper, but the words feel hollow. I'm not sure I believe them myself. As I carry him back to bed, I can't shake the thought that this nightmare isn't just his. It's mine too, and no matter how much I want to protect him, I don't know if I can. I tuck him in, sitting on the edge of his bed, watching as his eyes slowly drift closed. He deserves so much better than this. He deserves a father who isn't consumed by anger and regret, but I don't know how to be that man anymore. I don't know if I ever will. When I'm sure he's asleep, I slip out of the room, closing the door quietly behind me. I stand there for a moment, my hand on the doorknob, the silence pressing in around me, and I realize that I'm not just trying to protect him from the man out there. I'm trying to protect him from me, from what I've become. I sit back down in the living room, the whiskey still in my hand, the phone buzzing again with another message I refuse to read. I stare at the empty space in front of me, my mind numb. This isn't over. It might never be over. But for now, all I can do is sit here, in this moment, and try to figure out what comes next. Because after everything that's happened, after all the destruction, the lies and the revenge, I'm not sure there's anything left. And that thought terrifies me more than anything else.